Welcome, friends, to the mind of Mr. Paleface. Let the nightmares begin. This is crazy, said Carl, staring at his computer screen, the only source of light in his living room. It was midnight and all was quiet, except for the almost inaudible hum from the laptop computer sitting in his lap. That was just how Carl liked it. He never very much enjoyed the company of other people. No. Carl preferred to spend his time surfing the web, playing video games, or just relaxing at home, alone. This is crazy, he repeated. Carl was referring to the clown epidemic that was now the talk of the online horror community. It all started with some freak occurrence in Greenville County, South Carolina, back in August. Residents at some apartment complex in Greenville reported that a person wearing a clown costume was seen lurking around and trying to convince kids to come into the woods. That was August. It was October now, and since then, the clown sightings have popped up all over the US. This was a pretty big deal to Carl. He'd been terrified of them for as long as he could remember. When he was only 6, his father had forced him to watch the movie It. You know, the one based off of that Stephen King book with the evil clown that lived in the sewers. He's had countless nightmares ever since, and every clown from that day forward was considered evil as far as Carl was concerned. Just the mere thought of someone dressed as a clown lurking in the woods was enough to give him chills. Carl lived in a small town in Ohio called Minford and stayed in the house he inherited from his father after he passed away. It was a small house with what people would call the bare minimum, but Carl got cell service and that was enough for him. The house itself was atop a hill and surrounded by forest. It had a gravel driveway that stretched a quarter-mile long before hitting the old dirt road that you'd have to follow for about 5 or 6 miles before ever reaching a paved road. As mentioned before, Carl liked his privacy. As someone who went out of his way to avoid interaction with other people, he was surprised to hear a knock on the front door. This was strange because he literally lived in the textbook definition of the middle of nowhere. In order to get there, you'd have to know where you're going. Needless to say, Carl was a bit unnerved. He got up and peeked through the window next to the door. No one was there. Pranksters maybe. But whoever came all the way out here to Carl's just to mess with him is someone that he wasn't looking forward to meeting. Still, he got up and turned the deadbolt on the front door and swung it open. The crisp night air gave Carl chills as he stepped out onto his front porch, looking in every direction for the source of the knock on his door. It was midnight, and the moon wasn't exactly shining bright tonight, so it was extremely dark. The wind made an eerie sound as it made its way through the forest and trees. Carl was comforted by the sound of crickets and other wildlife surrounding his home. This was one of the reasons he enjoyed living here. It was so peaceful, he had almost forgotten about why he opened the door in the first place. Just then, all the noise stopped. Dead silence. No more wind, no more crickets. All that could be heard was what Carl could only describe as a broken squeaky toy. The sound felt like it was coming from Carl's head more than the outside. He searched for the sound, but was unable to pinpoint where it was coming from. Then he saw it. The clown was about 10 feet to the right side of his porch, standing on the edge of the forest. All he could see was the silhouette, due to the lack of light. But Carl knew right away that it was a clown. The outline of the hair, big goofy shoes, and baggy clothing was all there. He was just standing there, perfectly still, laughing in that eerily squeaky voice. Carl quickly turned towards the door, now kicking himself for going outside in the first place. He had to get back inside the house. He could hear slow and steady footsteps behind him, which sent chills up his spine. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he frantically grabbed for the door handle to pull it closed. He could practically feel the clown reaching for him as he dove inside the house. He stood with his back against the door, panting and breathing heavily. The footsteps stopped right in front of the porch when Carl closed the door. He knew the clown was right outside, though the laughing had ceased. His anxiety was kicking in, and once it started, it was hard to stop. It was the reason he avoided interaction with other people to the extent that he did. Now there was a fucking clown outside his house, which was in the middle of nowhere. His cell phone was on the table by his couch, but he didn't dare move. To get it, he would have to walk past the window, and he could already see in his mind's eye the clown's face pressed up against the glass. He was miles away from any town or police station, so it wouldn't help anyway. There was a gun in his father's old safe in his room, but before he tried to make a run for it, he once again thought of the clown looking in at him, smiling. No, he would wait. He slid down and sat with his back against the door. And that's exactly what he did. He waited. Carl awoke sometime later, curled up on the floor in front of his door. He decided it was time to get up. After all, he couldn't stay here forever. He pushed himself to his feet and quickly ran over to shut the curtains to the living room window. It was still dark outside. He made his way over to the table where his phone was. The numbers across the little screen read 3:05 a.m. Carl decided not to phone the police. He hated social interaction to such a degree that it wasn't worth it to have to wait on them to come out and then have a conversation with them on top of that. With his luck, all traces of the clown would be gone, and he would just look ridiculous in the end. This was the cost of living where he did. He would have to take matters into his own hands. He went into his room and saw his father's safe there in the corner. Quickly punching in the code on the little keypad, he opened it, removing the 12-gauge shotgun from inside. After loading the gun, he went back into his living room and to the window, drew in a breath, and peeked outside. What he saw almost caused him to drop the gun. The clown was still there, just standing on his front porch, with its back to the window. Carl started to panic. He searched for the courage to do something and came up empty-handed. He was just standing there in awe of what he was seeing. The clown had on a sloppily made costume with many different types of fabric. The cloth around its right leg had bright yellow polka dots, while its other leg was covered with green and purple stripes. It had on a dirty yellow raincoat that made its blood red, curly hair stand out strong against the rest of the outfit. All of its skin was white, and its shoes were bright red and had little bells dangling where the toes were. All the attributes of Carl's worst nightmares were manifested in the creature standing on his porch. Carl was so stricken with fear, he didn't realize his grip on his phone was slipping. It collided with the floor, waking him from his daze. He quickly bent down and picked it up, and when he looked back out the window, the clown was an inch away, staring straight at him. Its teeth were razor sharp and formed a menacing grin, like a predator looking at its next meal. Its eyes were completely black, with no white to be seen. Its nose was just a red circle crudely painted on its face. There was no physical nose, just nothing. This thing barely resembled a human. It looked Carl in the eye and began breathing heavily. It looked as though it was about to explode from excitement and started bouncing up and down in place. Its smile grew so big, Carl thought for sure it had to be painful. That was all Carl could take. He threw himself from the window and started hyperventilating. It was near impossible to breathe. His chest started tightening more and more with each passing moment. The thing, whatever it actually was now laughing like a fucking maniac and throwing itself at the door. With shaky hands, he cocked the gun and pointed it at the door. Preparing himself for the worst, he tried his best to steady his breathing. The door let out a loud crack and sounded like it was about to give. This startled Carl into firing the gun. He had fired the gun at the same time the fiend had broken through. The door was hanging slightly ajar and on one hinge. Carl cocked the gun and moved slowly to his left, hoping to see a dead clown on his porch. Instead, he only found a bloodstain on the door where it had been throwing its body. He slowly crept forward to examine the scene closer. As he approached the door, he lowered the gun. The clown was gone, as far as he could tell. That's when he heard the crash. Something had just crashed through his bedroom window. He turned and saw the clown rounding the corner into the hallway, sprinting at him with an inhuman speed. Carl panicked. He ran outside and made a run for his truck. As he got closer, he threw the gun into the back and quickly jumped in. He turned the key and nothing happened. This thing messed with his truck while he was sleeping, and Carl had left his phone inside in the rush. He had nowhere to go. Suddenly, as all hope was fading, Carl was filled with a new feeling. He was starting to feel happy and giddy. He thought for sure this was him losing his mind. He looked back to the house to see that the clown was now doing a perfect handstand. It looked straight at him, smiling knowingly. Carl found himself opening the door to the truck and walking towards the clown, who was completely motionless. What could be so bad? He found himself thinking. He looks like he's having fun. Carl was now standing next to the clown. All around him, from the woods, he heard squeaky laughing. Only this time, it was a pleasant and comforting sound. Behind this new crazy Carl was the scared and terrified Carl. He was consciously aware of his actions, but couldn't stop himself from walking into the woods with the clown. He couldn't help the sudden urges to skip and frolic along with his new friends. Soon, the scared and timid Carl was gone. He woke up the next day in his room. Rolling out of bed, he went into the bathroom to put on his makeup and file down his teeth. He and his friends have a lot of work to do before the big day, for it's almost Halloween. Carl and his friends will be able to walk around unnoticed and blend in with society, as everyone will be dressing up. It will be a glorious night of feeding and making new friends. Carl giggled at the thought. Hello friends, Mr. Paleface here. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe